Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex forecast. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. Last week was a great week. We had 4 interest rate decisions. However, there were a number of really good setups and a number of the markets that we looked at went all the way to their max targets. And coming up this week, we have a pretty clear run in the economic calendar, and it looks like once again, we're going to get a number of good opportunities coming up this week. So just a brief look required at the economic calendar this week because there's not too much going on. We have the Bank of England governor speaking. We also have CPI out of Australia where we could see some volatility and some GDP data, final GDP data out of the US on Thursday. Apart from that, we really do not have too much going on. The main thing I would say next week is the PCE price index, the inflation data, of course, this being. And this could move the markets on Friday, but it's all the way back out on Friday. So for short-term trading, we have a pretty clear run at the markets next week without too much risk event. Okay, so let's look at the scores for the coming week. And last week, the Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar were highlighted as the best shorts, with the Swiss franc, the pound, and the yen to the upside as the best long plays last week. And we had some really nice moves in these pairs. CAD franc bounced to the downside, Aussie franc bounced and started trading lower to the downside. They were good shorts last week. Pound Aussie, Pound CAD, Aussie and CAD Yen, which were highlighted as 2 favorite ones from last week, performed really well into their max profit targets. So all in all, a really good week last week, despite the 4 interest rate decisions. And going into this week, you can see not too much has actually changed. What this tells us is the same regime is kind of in place as it was last week, and we should still be looking for opportunities in those same markets which performed so well last week. Now, with the markets which moved to their targets last week, bear in mind, markets do not move in a straight line. So do not be surprised to see some of these correct first. But any pullbacks in these markets, I would be looking to take advantage of once again. The difference here is that the pound has moved into the top spot. So primarily this week, I'm interested in Pound Aussie to the upside, Pound CAD to the upside. And then after that, we'll also look at Pound New Zealand to the upside, but I favor these two over Pound New Zealand. And I'm also interested once again in Aussie CAD, Aussie Yen to the downside. We'll also look at New Zealand Yen to the downside. And also the Swiss franc pairs here, Aussie franc to the downside once again, CAD franc to the downside once again. And we'll also look at New Zealand franc to the downside as well. Now, you can go and look also if you really wanted to at EurCad to the upside, Euro Aussie to the upside, Euro New Zealand to the upside. But my primary 3 long currencies are these versus these 3 commodity currencies to the short side. That is my main play going into next week. That's where I'm going to be looking for trading opportunities next week. Okay, so let's have a look at the individual currencies before moving on to the markets themselves. Looking at this in the daily chart, you can see the dollar has really just been consolidating, chopping around the 2-year and the 7-year breakout. These levels I've had on here for quite a while. And nothing has really been decisive yet. And in the scorecards are still telling us to remain neutral on the dollar. I've actually been neutral on the dollar for a while. So going into next week, I am neutral on the dollar. However, there is a much bigger picture being painted of risk off coming into markets, and in risk off, the dollar tends to get bid up and catches a bid. So in terms of the dollar pairs that we'll look at this week, I do not have a strong bias on them, but I do favor dollar long plays in the Forex markets, because if something starts to break in the stock market and we start to see stocks selling off, you are going to see a flight to safety, and you do not primarily want to be on the wrong side of that by shorting dollars. But also, if you are trading dollars to the long side, you may take advantage of that if it materializes. So it's really a risk management decision to favor dollar longs next week over dollar shorts, even though I do not have a very strong bias as it currently stands on the dollar itself. Next is the euro. Now, very much like the dollar, it's just been consolidating around these major breakout levels. However, last week we did have a big sell-off towards the end of the week, and as it currently stands, we do have now, if this is going to fail, a lower high, and certainly that would be confirmed the new trend down below here. I do think still we are coming back down to the lows. However, because of the lack of direction in the dollar, we've just really been seeing this correcting, but my overall target is back down to the lows in the euro. Going into next week, you can see we had a strong rally with momentum and we kind of sold off. We kind of did this V top over here, inverse V top. And so I do not have a strong bias on the euro. I do favor euro strength vis-a-vis the commodity currencies, however, like we looked at in the scorecards. So EuroCAD, EurUsd, Euro New Zealand to the upside. Although we're not looking at those markets this week, those are markets I would also consider. But I prefer these markets over the euro pairs next week. Next is the pound. The pound has also just been consolidating underneath this high over here. So again, as the dollar's just been consolidating, so has the pound. I do think the pound is coming back down to the lows, and again, I do think the dollar is going to be heading back up to the highs, although currently it's neutral, and we're talking about, over the course of this year. So as it currently stands, I am sort of neutral technically on this, but the scorecards are pointing towards relative pound strength that we should be paying attention to. So going into next week, I do favor pound CAD, pound Aussie as my two favorite markets, and also I'd be interested in pound New Zealand to the upside as well. Next is the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc did break the major double bottom we've been tracking since the beginning of the year. We came back, we tested it, and then we got a big piece of momentum. And this was so strong that we did need to pause and consolidate a bit. So perhaps the Swiss franc does pull back a little bit. However, I am looking for a potential major breakout to the upside in the Swiss franc. And again, I think the Swiss franc heads much higher this year. And it's another risk-off safe haven asset, whereby if we do get stocks selling off over April, which I think is going to be quite likely, I do think in April we could see quite a bit of risk off coming into markets, and the Swiss franc is going to benefit to the upside. So again, I do like CAD franc, Aussie franc to the downside primarily, and they paid very nicely last week for anybody who was shorting those. And New Zealand franc is something as well we could look at, but not as good in my opinion as Aussie franc and CAD franc based on the scorecard data. Next is the Japanese yen. Now the Japanese yen is also kind of neutral. There hasn't been huge direction in markets. You can see we've kind of just been chopping, and we are back to where we were in August. However, again, I do favor Japanese yen strength, especially if we're going to start to see risk off coming into markets. I really want to be focused going into next week and for the time being on those risk off setups. So CAD yen, Aussie yen, both performed really nicely into their max profit targets last week, but also New Zealand yen we'll look at. I wouldn't be surprised to see these correcting a little bit. We may need to see the yen coming back, and then that's the opportunity, perhaps towards the end of the week or even into the week after, to start to look for those plays once again. Next is the CAD. As it currently stands, just looking at this as a near-term bear flag, and I am looking for this to resolve itself to the downside. Coming back down to the lows, this is the target I am looking for in the Canadian dollar, and I do think we could actually break down here and come a lot further, because this is quite close to the lows, and it does look like a number of the other markets, the pound, the Aussie, the New Zealand, the euro, do have quite a way to go to their lows. So if that's the case, this is quite likely, if the other markets are coming down to the lows, this is going to break this low and continue lower. So I like CAD shorts, and especially as crude oil is pretty bearish as it currently stands, this is going to weigh on the Canadian dollar to the downside. Next is the Australian dollar. Ever since we traded into this high, I was saying to you that I think the Australian dollar is coming down to its lows, just as with the euro, we're still up in this area, and I'm saying to you, I think we're coming down to the lows, and the pound, we're still up in this area, and I'm saying to you, we're likely coming down to the lows in my opinion. The Aussie is kind of leading. It's like a leading indicator of the pound and the euro, in the sense that it's more sensitive to the dollar. So if this starts to sell off and the dollar rallies, you're going to see the pound and the euro starting to sell off after these commodity currencies. So we are seeing Aussie dollar. It's been correcting. This, in my opinion, is simply an opportunity to look for shorts. And we did start to sell off. I do think we're coming back down to the lows. So very bearish on the Australian dollar as it currently stands. And this is one of my best shorts heading into next week vis-a-vis these risk-off currencies of the yen, the pound, and the Swiss franc. So just quickly on that, the pound is not inherently a very risk-off or safe haven asset, but versus the commodity currencies, it is a risk-off play, because the pound and the euro will rally against the commodity currencies if there's risk off. So the pound versus the yen and the franc will decline, but against the commodity currencies, it is risk off, even though it's not a safe haven asset in and of itself. And finally, the New Zealand dollar. Again, as we were testing these highs at the beginning of the year, I did point out that I believe this was running out of road and we are heading down towards the lows. We've started to make our way down, and this was a double top reversal, broke here, and all we're seeing is some consolidation, some volatility around the breakout. I do expect this to continue lower, down towards the lows like the other markets here, as the DXY heads back up to the highs it made last year. It's not going to happen next week, of course, this is bigger picture, but putting everything into context with that, if we're looking to be short New Zealand franc, short New Zealand yen, long pound New Zealand, when this takes place, if this takes place, you'd be on the right side of that. Okay, so let's have a look at the watch list heading into next week. I always do crude oil every single week, so I don't actually have a particularly strong bias on this. I am bearish on crude oil, but it is kind of corrective at the moment. So any continued pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts. And if we get down to the 64 area, this is where I would consider it a max profit taking opportunity, because below here, you start to see the odds turn against you for further declines. Next is GbpCad. Now, GbpCad did move higher last week, and we're starting to get a little bit choppy here, lacking a bit of momentum. So what I would like to see is any pullback in this market would be viewed as the opportunity to look for buying setups. And any buy setup I get involved with, if it gets to the 1.700, this would be my max profit taking opportunity in GbpCad next week. Next is Pound Aussie, and this was the max profit taking area for Pound Aussie long positions. And as you can see, we finished right in this area. Once you get above this, as I said before, the odds of continuing higher are quite low. Coming into this week then, any pullback in this market is once again viewed as an opportunity to look for buy setups. I'm going to be looking up towards the 1.86250, and if it does get up towards that area, that would be my max profit taking opportunity next week in this pair. And the final pound pair is Pound New Zealand. Now, Pound CAD, Pound Aussie, CAD Yen, Aussie Yen, CAD Franc, Aussie Franc are my 6 top markets next week, but I am also interested in Pound New Zealand. So any pullback in this market, you can see a nice big bull flag setting up here. Any pullback, if this A, B, C back down to here, this would be identified as an opportunity to start to look for potential long entries. And if we do get involved to the long side, I'm going to be looking up towards the 2.00 area as the max profit taking opportunity for next week. And remember, you don't have to come into the max profit taking opportunity zone. Any bounce, is valid to start to book profits throughout the week, but this is the max profit taking opportunity next week. Next is CAD Yen. CAD Yen to the downside was one of my favorite markets last week, and look at how this went into the max profit taking area and bounced. That was the opportunity in there to book your profits on any shorts last week. Heading into this week, I am looking for short opportunities once again. Because we came all the way down and tested this zone last week, do not be surprised to see a near-term correction. Markets have to correct. They don't move in a straight line. So any pullback is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts down towards the 93.25 area. Next is Aussie Yen, another market highlighted as one of my favorite markets last week to the downside. Aussie Yen traded into the max profit taking zone, and look at how it finished the week right there and started to bounce. Any continued pullback in this market next week is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for shorts into the 85 area. And the final yen pair is New Zealand yen. You can see we've broken out of this consolidation here with momentum, and any correction in this area, if we come back and retest the lows over here, this would be viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts in this market. And any pullback looking to short this down towards the 79.50 area. So again, I do favor Aussie Yen and CAD Yen to the downside, but I would also be interested in keeping my eye out for any potential short opportunities in New Zealand yen. Next is CAD Franc. Really nice opportunity to short this market last week, and in fact I did short this up in this area, which I shared with members of GMT, and we started to sell off to the downside. Any pullback in this area would once again be viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts down to the 0.6610 area, or you could look down to this low. If we test this low, that is a good profit taking opportunity next week. Next is Aussie Franc, another market which I liked last week and did short. And although we didn't come all the way down to the target area, we did have a really nice sell-off. So any pullback in this market this week is simply viewed as another opportunity to short this down towards the previous low at 0.6020. And the final market here, New Zealand franc. So I prefer these two versus the franc, but I would also be interested in potential shorts in this market. Any pullback, and if we come back, we may actually get this, what's known as a flat pattern here, this kind of correction. So you've got your momentum, and then you have this kind of ABC flat pattern. Some people call it a rectangle. But look for opportunities to short this market on a pullback down towards the previous lows, 0.5620. Okay, so moving on to the dollar pairs. I also do euro dollar every single week. I do not have a strong bias on euro dollar though going into next week, and the scorecards actually point to the upside. So what I would like to do is going into next week, I would like to be reactive on dollar pairs, because if we get a stronger dollar or we get setups which are breaking out with dollar strength, then I would be looking at euro dollar to consolidate or correct, and I'd be looking for shorts down towards the 1.0600. And also I'd be interested in US dollar CAD to the upside and Aussie dollar to the downside. If you wanted to go and short the dollar, my view is that the best dollar shorts would be in being long gold and being long silver, possibly being long Bitcoin. But certainly gold and silver to the upside, I would favor over going long euro dollar, going short US dollar CAD, or going long Aussie dollar next week. So looking to be reactive next week with the dollar pairs. These three markets here, I favor dollar strength. And these two markets, especially perhaps this market, I would favor dollar weakness by looking for those to be trading to the upside. Next is US dollar CAD. Now I quite like US dollar CAD because the dollar is scoring higher than the Canadian dollar. So the US dollar is scoring higher than the Canadian dollar, unlike euro dollar where they're both, in fact the euro is stronger than the dollar, which points to the downside. So I don't have a very strong bias in this. I do favor these two. If you wanted to go long dollars, I would leave euro dollar and I would be long US dollar versus the CAD, or short the Aussie versus the dollar. And you can see a really nice bull flag setting up here. We've got this kind of, not really a triple bottom as such, but it's kind of like that. You can see it's lacking momentum. Then we have momentum on the breakout. So any pullback in this market would be viewed as an opportunity to look for longs into the 1.3870 area. Next is Aussie dollar. Now again, where I would probably leave euro dollar totally next week, I do like US dollar CAD and I do like Aussie dollar to the downside for dollar strength. Why? Because we've started to break out of this large kind of consolidation. And what we're seeing here when we do that is we've got this initial sell-off, and then any pullback in this area would be viewed as a potential right shoulder for a head and shoulders reversal. I'm going to be looking down towards the 0.6530 area. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold, silver and Bitcoin, starting with the gold silver ratio. What's interesting about this is we have actually broken, and we're looking at the daily chart here, a head and shoulders down in this area. So we may actually see, relatively speaking, an outperformance of silver over gold over the next couple of weeks. So just keep that in mind. However, I do like both gold and silver to the upside whilst the dollar is neutral. If that changes and the dollar becomes strong in the scorecard system, then I will favor gold and silver shorts. But as it currently stands, the dollar is neutral, so I do favor, if we're going to be short dollars, I favor shorting them versus those metals. Next is gold. Again, looking on the daily chart because I want to show you how strong this move has been. So when you get a move that strong, the market has to pause, has to correct. So I am looking for a target up in the 2030 area. However, don't be surprised to see this form a bit of an A, B, and a C to consolidate first, because markets do not move in a straight line. I mean, take this over here. Big move has to consolidate. Big move has to consolidate. In this case, actually makes new lows. Big move has to consolidate. So don't be surprised to see this pulling back next week, but that would be on balance, as long as we have a neutral dollar and the dollar doesn't start to really strengthen, that would be the opportunity to go long into the 2030 area. Next is silver. Now look at how this traded into the max profit zone last week, and that was absolutely where this move finished and we started to reject. So that was your opportunity to book profits in silver if you were long last week. Coming into this week, that is actually another piece of the puzzle for what we could be seeing next week, because now we've traded into the max profit zone. This move as well likely needs to correct, consolidate. So don't be surprised to see this pulling back next week. It may need a week or so to consolidate. As it currently stands, that would be viewed as an opportunity to look for longs into the 24-22 area roughly. So overall, I do favor gold and silver to the upside on balance. They are not one of my favorite pairs. Why? Because I do think we could see some dollar strength soon. And if that's the case, these will no longer be very good longs. So if I am going to go short, I would prefer to be buying gold and silver to the upside. And the Forex pairs themselves, I favor for dollar strength. So really you could think of my plan A as being dollar strength. So that's US dollar CAD to the upside, Aussie dollar to the downside as my two favorite dollar plays. And then outside of that, if I was going to short dollars, it would be versus the metals. But as I've just shown you, very good chance the metals correct next week. What does that mean? This actually adds weight to US dollar CAD higher, Aussie dollar lower next week on dollar strength. And last but not least, we have Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is currently bullish, technically speaking. We broke above the previous highs. I don't really like Bitcoin. I don't like the way it's trading. Very, very volatile moves and these kind of V bottoms. We're not really seeing any nice patterns here. Going into next week, the problem here is that Bitcoin is correlated to tech. And recently in the scorecards for US sectors, tech has been highlighted as the best long and it has outperformed. However, We did get the signal towards the end of last week that the upside in tech is now probably limited. And what that means is you may find that Bitcoin consolidates or even starts to reverse next week. So I don't have a very strong bias on Bitcoin because technically it's bullish, but we may actually see some near-term weakness. So let that correct. I'll probably leave Bitcoin altogether and see how stocks develop going into April. Because going into April, I do think we could see stocks lower, and this would, of course, pull Bitcoin lower with it as well. So to summarize those, don't be surprised to see gold, silver, and Bitcoin correcting next week as we get some near-term strength in the dollar, in which case US dollar CAD to the upside, Aussie dollar to the downside would be the better dollar plays, in my opinion. So that is it for me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the room each day where I go through these markets and the setups that I'm personally looking at with members on a daily basis for over 75 markets in different asset classes, including stocks, bonds, Forex, and commodities. So if you'd like to know more about the benefits of GMT membership, why not check out the link in the description below and in the pinned comment where you can get a 2-week free trial totally risk-free. So have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you all next week.